Hello again, and welcome to Herd Immunity News. I'm Marcus Botzer. I have the great pleasure in welcoming back a very close friend of Herd Immunity News and close friend of mine, Mr. Jim Ferguson. Jim runs the fantastic Truth Warrior channel on Twitter. He's a fantastic broadcaster, interviewer, and all of his stuff is right on the money. If you haven't checked it out, please do. We will leave all the links to this great man. But without further ado, let me say, Jim, how are you, sir?
I'm great, thanks, Marcus. I got over a bad flu that knocked me out for a number of weeks, but I'm caught up pretty much, and I'm delighted to be back here on Herd Immunity News with you.
It's great to have you on, and it's great to see you back to full strength because we need you. And there's so much to talk about, Jim. First, I'd like to get your thoughts, please, on the goings-on in the Canadian Parliament. Now,
Yeah.
you've commented on this, the situation where the Parliament in Canada, led by Justin Trudeau, standing ovation was given to a 98-year-old who turned out to be a member of the SS. Now, subsequently, Trudeau, true to fashion, has blamed this all on the Speaker of the House, Anthony Rota. Jim, what's going on? Because it looks like there's more to this than meets the eye.
Well, there's a lot of things that's coming out. Just before we came on camera, I was telling you that I'd spent an entire day looking into what was going on in Canada, and a good part of yesterday, I have to say, as well. There's no surprises that Justin Trudeau blamed the Speaker Rota and sort of hung him out to dry. He would have been told that he was going to take the fall. This is the kind of behavior that we've come to expect from weak men like Justin Trudeau. A real leader would stand up, take the hit in the chin, and would either resign or battle on, but he wouldn't sacrifice those around him just to save his own political career. So there's a weakness with Trudeau that actually will lead to his downfall in the end. In relation to the Ukrainian coming in, who was a veteran of the Galician Waffen SS under the Wehrmacht in Ukraine, I actually think that they are so arrogant that they thought they could get away with it. You have to understand, and people have to understand what they're dealing with. They're dealing with the World Economic Forum, led by Klaus Schwab, who has got many, many people in positions of power in government all around the world. They think they're untouchable. And what's been very interesting about this, Marcus, is that it has revealed something that they probably didn't expect. The kind of reaction that has just overwhelmed them all. And I'm getting some inside information here that what has happened in Canada has drawn the ire of very senior members of the World Economic Forum and globalist elite. And what has happened there is that he has basically shone a light on what the World Economic Forum are. But to try to answer your question, what's going on there is very interesting. It's interesting from Justin Trudeau's point of view, but perhaps what's even more interesting is his deputy, Chrystia Freeland, who, it turns out, is descended from collaborators with the Nazi regime in Ukraine. And there seems to be emerging reports coming out that is pinpointing the fact that her family members may, in fact, have been in the same Waffen SS regiment, the Galicia regiment in Nazi Ukraine, as the SS veteran that came and given a standing ovation. And there are other things that are starting to come to light as well. And there's a big question mark on the finances that have been going to Ukraine as well. Now, you have to also be aware that Canadian politics is a little bit different. I've learned a huge amount since I've been engaging with so many Canadians over the course of the last 3, 4, 5 months. as I have been with people all around the world. It's incredibly fascinating and interesting to understand the similarities of what's going on in their political structures. It's fascinating to learn. But they had sort of a person that was, responsible for answering questions from members of the public. If they wanted to know how a certain amount of finance was being spent, for example, they could contact this person. This person had a duty to report back to anybody that asked what was happening, where it was going. Well, that person has been absent for a long period of time, 1 to maybe even 3 years. And the person that's been running Canadian finance at the moment is none other than the Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland. And her historical family links to Ukraine and the Nazis that were in there, with her grandfather on her mother's side, as reported in a lot of the tweets that I sent out today with all the detail of it, is really quite revealing. So it would appear, because we've seen photographs of her, we've seen video of her.
Yes.
She was joyously applauding this Nazi Waffen SS war criminal in the Canadian Parliament. You could see it in her face.
Yeah.
But she's not smiling now, because this has revealed something very dark in Canada's past, where up to 5,000 Nazis went and settled there after World War II. And I think that what we're starting to see is some of those descendants of those Nazis who have risen to positions of prominence and power through none other than the World Economic Forum starting to be revealed. And it might not just be in Canada. What we're now interested in is where else the Nazis go. We know that through Operation Paperclip, for example, many scientists, rocket engineers, etc., were taken over to America, top secret at the time, but of course these things got revealed. But 5,000 of them went to Canada. And indeed, there may be those who settled in Britain, perhaps with other identities. I think we need to know who they are and where they are and where their offspring now are. And indeed, I watched with interest when Chrystia Freeland was being asked a question about the Nazis that went to Canada. And her reaction was priceless. Her hands were wringing together. Her head was down. At the very mention of the word Nazi, she virtually crumbled before the camera and then didn't answer the question in typical political style. But I think it's time to dig deeper. I think it's time to reveal just who is involved with historical links to the Nazis. I don't believe the Nazi Party was truly defeated. The Nazi war machine was, but I actually think that they went underground and have resurfaced in Canada, of all places, but they're everywhere. And I would imagine that a great many of them, as Chrystia Freeland is also a member, and not just a member, but a senior board member of the World Economic Forum. I wonder what made Herr Klaus Schwab think it was such a good idea to appoint a former descendant of Ukrainian Nazis to his senior board. But then again, Klaus Schwab himself has also got family historical connections to Nazi Germany, where his father, Eugene Schwab, ran businesses there on behalf of the Nazis. And indeed, the people that worked there did so for no payment. So that's interesting too, isn't it?
It is very interesting indeed. I mean, you've lifted the lid now on what some people have been saying for years, but you're adding to the throng of powerful voices. And if we look at Chrystia Freeland, she actually played a part in the change of government in Ukraine back in 2014. In her journalistic role, she was leading the charge of what was called in Ontario's Ring of Fire, where they were campaigning actively to have a replacement in government in Ukraine for these purposes. She was also one of the first voices looking to ban Canadians from travelling to Russia. This was back in 2014. So her ties to not only what it looks like by what you're telling us, Jim, it looks like her ties in this run very, very deep indeed, not just to her Ukrainian past, to the family's links to the SS, but also in the regime change in 2014 that's been pivotal in what we see now with the conflict between Russia, NATO, and Ukraine.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's important for people, perhaps younger generations, that may not understand what the Waffen SS were. They weren't normal, ordinary soldiers. And let's face it, I come, and I think you do too, but I certainly come from a long line of military service in countless wars. Our family have fought, not just in World War II, World War I, but we go all the way back to the Napoleonic Wars, and our family fought all over the world, and indeed all the way back to the Scottish clans. When they weren't fighting with the English, they were fighting with each other. So war's in our blood, but you don't necessarily have an issue when you are at war. You either fight or you don't fight, you either kill or you don't kill. The Waffen SS had a very special role in Nazi Germany, and their role was to murder Jews and everybody that didn't agree with the Nazi apparatus. That's why all Waffen SS and SS members were designated as war criminals in the Nuremberg trials.
Polish government are actually very interested in having back the 98-year-old SS veteran, Mr. Hunka. There are calls for him to come back to face war crimes, Jim.
I believe he was an Oberfuhrer. He was an officer. He wasn't just an ordinary soldier. He was an officer that held senior rank within the Waffen SS Galicia Ukrainian Nazi division under the Wehrmacht. Yes. And the Galicia division were historically recorded as being responsible for the wholesale slaughter of men, women, and children, and Jews and others in Poland. And he is, make no mistake about it, he is a Nazi war criminal. He's not an ordinary soldier or an ordinary combatant. He's part of Hitler's Waffen SS, which makes it so much worse for what Chrystia Freeland and Justin Trudeau did. It is
absolutely, and there's more evidence coming out. There are more voices coming forward to say that this is not the fault of the Canadian Speaker in Parliament, Mr. Anthony Rota. There's claims that actually Trudeau had meetings beforehand to help set this up. What do you know about that, Jim?
Well, a very interesting Facebook post, and I would urge you to look at it, and I would encourage people to look at it. It's on my Twitter channel, appeared from Teresa Hunka, who is the Nazis' granddaughter, who had also, I believe, been invited to the Parliament to see the proceedings. And she displayed a photograph of her grandfather in a wheelchair. And the date's very interesting. And the comments on it were that he was looking forward, he being her grandfather, was looking forward to meeting Zelensky and Justin Trudeau personally, which would indicate that Rota simply fell on his sword. That he simply, and remember, Rota is a member of the Liberal Party, and he would have been persuaded to save Trudeau's bacon. But at the end of the day, that Facebook post is now doing the rounds. And I don't think this is going to easily be swept under the carpet. Too much has come to light. And I think they're on the ropes. And this is highly damaging. Make no mistake about it. It is highly damaging to the World Economic Forum as well, because they are now being pegged to this through their membership of all the WEF members, wherever they are. And I believe, and I've seen some evidence of this, that there are now World Economic Forum members who are requesting that their details are removed from the World Economic website.
Yeah, and there does seem to be quite an exodus of these people. Over in New Zealand, we saw Jacinda Ardern suddenly fall on her sword. To a lesser extent, we've seen Nicola Sturgeon as well, even though she's a minnow in this game, but the net is sort of closing in on these people. And now we're seeing all the cracks emerging on Justin Trudeau's face and his party's face. And there's only so many times that he can shift blame onto other people. And obviously, with the Liberal in the chair as a speaker, Rota, he was an easy target. But this is far from over, Jim, so it seems.
I would draw your attention also, Marcus, to I had a comment from a retired professor in America, and I did a fairly extensive report on Chrystia Freeland, connected to the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, and he commented on it, and you could tell right away that he had analysed it, and he described it as being a very cogent report, and he went into some detail in his reply back to me. But what he said was very interesting, and I'll repeat it here. Basically, he was drawing the parallels to Vladimir Putin and Russia. And he was explaining, which I was already aware of, but he did a good job of explaining it. And what he basically said was that Vladimir Putin was a member of the World Economic Forum and had been getting groomed by Klaus Schwab and others to take on their policies and to enact the New World Order as they saw it. And he basically learned all their secrets and all their inner circles and decided that he was not going to take part and that Mother Russia would be where his loyalties went. And that is why there is so much anger against Putin and Russia, because they see him as having betrayed them and their trust. And in a sense, perhaps he did, but I don't think it was misplaced. And indeed, this vehement attack that anything to do with Russia is evil and bad, and Putin is, just an evil person. I don't know him. I don't particularly want to. But the point is this. They are obsessed with Ukraine. And when you start to see people like Chrystia Freeland, with her family historical connections to the Nazi party in Nazi Ukraine, in trying to invade Russia, fighting against the Russians and getting absolutely slaughtered, when the half of Germany basically fell once the invasion happened. And remember, the Russians lost millions of people when the Battle of Stalingrad and all these other historical battles. Yes. And when they went into Berlin, they made the German people pay. I'm not saying that was a good thing. It would have been a very bad thing for ordinary Germans, but they were punished very severely for what they did. And of course, these people have long memories. But what's very interesting about the whole thing is that there is definitely a resurgence and a revealing of people at senior level within governments who have Nazi connections in Canada. And we need to find out where else they are. And of those 5,000 Nazis that went to Canada, I would like to know where they are now and who their descendants are. And the people that are standing up in defense of this, well, perhaps they have historical family connections to the Nazis. I think it's interesting, isn't it?
It is very interesting. And you mentioned Operation Paperclip, and no one should forget, for some of our younger viewers, that there was reports of up to 55,000 Nazis came over to America, and they were given jobs throughout the entire infrastructure of the United States, including NASA, also including Kirk Valheimer, who was on I think it was the Carter administration. And he basically denied all knowledge of ever being in the German army or being close to Hitler. And looking at the European Union, you have Ursula von der Leyen and her connections also. You have Mrs. Merkel, Frau Merkel, and her connections to the Stasi when we were experiencing and living through a separated, partitioned Germany, when she was off in East. But fascinating stuff, and it is going to go on. This won't end, and it shouldn't end, and you're doing a fantastic job in exposing it. But if I can bring you on to something else, please. And this is something very concerning, and it is linked to the World Economic Forum. Most things are, aren't they, Jim, these days? This was a meeting between King Charles III and Monsieur Macron over in France. And there's our king. Said he was going to stay out of politics. Do you remember that when he took the oath, coronation oath, to be impartial and be neutral? And there he is, Jim, over having a meeting with the French President Macron. And he's not going on about our borders. He's not going on about the dangers that this represents to the UK, having mass unlimited unfettered immigration, which Macron is facilitating. He came over to pledge himself and the UK to net zero, which is culling our country economically. I don't know what your thoughts are of the king and what he's doing to the monarchy and why he's obsessed with net zero and Monsieur Macron.
I've met members of the royal family. I've been invited to royal garden parties. I have nothing personal against the family at all.
Sure.
And I had a lot of respect for Her Majesty the Queen.
Yes.
But every serving soldier takes an oath to Her Majesty.
His Majesty now.
It's His Majesty now, but to Her Majesty.
Debatable, right?
The Queen. Well, the thing is, you know, there is an agreement, there is a partnership, there is a, shall we say, the king can't have it all his own way, and if he tries to do that, then he's broken the contract with the British people. And I put out an article which got a lot of attention, where I questioned the fact that if his loyalty was to a foreign nation or a foreign power or a foreign entity, then can he serve that, and can he serve in the capacity as the king? Can he be both? And there was some very interesting legal standpoints and replies that came back to that. I might try to retweet that at some point.
Sure.
But one thing that has shocked, concerned a lot of people, is that he has had a long association with Klaus Schwab.
Yes.
Since he was a young man, in his early 20s. And there is many photographs with him and other people with Klaus Schwab in the background, almost as if he was a handler, shall we say, or someone who was overseeing the king, the prince at that time. A mentor, whatever way you want to describe it, but he was there. And he and Prince Charles go back a long way. And we need to sort of maybe look at that as to what's really been going on there and why, and what purpose does it serve. But it's been a long time in the process, and that's a fact. That's not a wacky theory. It is in fact real, and there is photographic evidence that backs that up. So King Charles seems to be, although he said he wasn't going to get political, I don't think anybody really believed that, because of his previous comments and interference with Parliament and members of Parliament on issues that he's sort of raised. But what he was doing with Macron, and don't think it sat too well with people.
No, I mean, we've got lots of our followers, our beloved followers, who are monarchists, but they're not necessarily in favour of this king. And they're not in favour of this king, I put it to you, because he's not a champion for our country. He's not a champion for our safety, nor our security. And he does very little on the armed forces front, so it seems. His family seem to be in complete disarray, from Harry and Meghan to William's comments. William's employed Jacinda Ardern, who must be one of the worst world leaders in history. She was, again, one of the most draconian during the COVID-19 era. But we won't waste a lot of time on the likes of her. Thank you for clearing up your thoughts on Charles and Macron. We will keep an eye on that. But staying in the staying down south in the southern hemisphere, we're going to ask you to give us your views on Mr. Daniel Andrews. Daniel Andrews, the outgoing
Yes,
governor.
Dan Andrews, one of the most rabid, wicked World Economic Forum members I think I've witnessed to date. And I, Chrystia Freeland, Justin Trudeau are bad, but this man was drunk on power. You could see it in his eyes. It reminded me of Adolf Hitler, actually, at the podium. He was just frothing at the mouth about the fact that he had the power to order people to be locked down, to wear masks. And the Australian people that were under his rulership were brutalized by this man. And he has been rewarded with a $300,000 salary for life. He is now going to be the World Economic Forum's ambassador to Australia. So Klaus Schwab, having seen his loyalty to him, has now rewarded him with a step up. And as their grip on people around the world increase, he will be using Dan Andrews to push the globalist agenda and probably the brutalization of the people once again. The lockdowns aren't finished. The mandated vaccines aren't finished. They're going to happen again. And people have no idea the horror that awaits if they don't stand up and fight.
That's very true. I mean, Daniel Andrews, just to add a little bit on, Jim, he left a deficit of $250 billion after his 9-year reign of terror. And Prime Minister Albanese said the people of Victoria should be thankful for Daniel Andrews because he's a man of conviction. I think he got that wrong. I think he's a man who should be convicted.
I was going to say that.
But we'll give him the benefit of the doubt. Just finally, if we can, in the last few minutes, if that's okay, I want to get your thoughts on Susan Hall's comments today. She's the Conservative candidate for London Mayor. Don't know if you caught this one, Jim. It's quite a breaking story. She was on LBC interviewed by Nick Ferrari, the rotund broadcaster, who is quite a flowery chap himself. And he put it to her that she liked a tweet that contained the picture of Enoch Powell. And obviously, for those that don't know, for our younger viewers, Enoch Powell was a Conservative minister who spoke out against the dangers of unlimited, unbridled immigration. Now, whatever you think of Enoch Powell, if you want to see him as some sort of Nazi or soothsayer, whichever way you want to paint the man, he's right. Mass unlimited immigration is an absolute abomination. But she backtracked and she basically threw Enoch Powell on the bus. She also said, and this is maybe the more important point, Susan Hall, the Conservative candidate for London Mayor, said today on LBC to Nick Ferrari that she would keep all the ANPR cameras up. She wouldn't take them down. But she promised that this wouldn't be to continue on the ULEZ programme, Jim. She gave you her word as a Conservative that she would keep it on. What are your thoughts on all
that? People can inadvertently like a post, of course, and if you've noticed you've done that and you unlike it, well, fair enough. It can happen. I mean, I honestly do believe that people can inadvertently like something or not have read something properly, and you should, I suppose, if you're a member of Parliament in particular. But the fact that she backtracked, I didn't see too much of the comments because I've been focusing on Canada a lot over yesterday and today. So I'm not totally familiar with it, but I can tell you that I think that if you've got a position, you should stick to it. If you're too quick to suddenly change direction, what does that tell you? Well, it tells you that you will suddenly switch it around and you'll do whatever Klaus Schwab tells you to, because if she ends up joining the World Economic Forum, she will have no hesitation. And my thoughts as a former Conservative parliamentary candidate with many friends who are Conservatives. I think that it would be a massive mistake to re-elect the Conservative Party in this country. As it would be a massive mistake to elect a Labour government in this country. Both are globalist uniparties that are led by World Economic Forum members whose devotion is to Klaus Schwab and not to the British people. I have a problem with that. I think if you're elected and you are elected by certain countries' people, like in the UK or in Canada, your loyalty should be to those people, not to an unelected, shady character who's got a lot of strings that he's pulling around the world and using all sorts of Nazi-esque type language and propaganda to enact what he wants. And I think it's very concerning to see that similarity to what went on there in Nazi Germany rising again. People are going to have to wake up. They're going to have to stand up before it's too late and push back. But what's happened in Canada, I think, is a wake-up call to the world, because I don't think it's confined just to Canada. And the World Economic Forum has members all over the UK and the United States of America, as well as France and other nations like Australia and New Zealand. And those people need to understand that they are not being serviced by people whose loyalty is to Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum. And there is a deep concern now that is coming to light that many of those people do in fact have Nazi historical connections.
Well, there's so much for people to get into, so much reading to be done. And we will leave all the links to your fantastic websites, Twitter page, whatever you've got going on, because this is massive. This is a huge story, and it's ongoing and it's unfolding before our very eyes. But all that remains for me to do is to thank you very much indeed, Mr. Jim Ferguson, the Truth Warrior, for coming on Herd Immunity News. Thank you so much, Jim.
Thank you for having me on, Marcus. I look forward to being on with you and having you on my channel as well. All the very best.
You better believe it. Thank you so much, Jim.